The story begins in London, December 1814. The crystal chandeliers of Lady Finchley's Grosvenor Square residence blazed with the light of thousands of beeswax candles, casting golden shadows across marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Outside, snow fell in soft whispers against window panes frosted with winter's artistry. The annual Christmas ball had drawn the cream of London society, their silks and jewels glittering beneath the candlelight, as music from a string quartet wove through conversations conducted behind painted fans and false smiles. Victoria Ann Sinclair stood in her customary position behind an arrangement of potted palms near the cardroom entrance, her grey silk gown modest against the peacock display surrounding her. At 28 years old, she had perfected the art of invisibility, that particular skill possessed by women whom society had deemed unremarkable. Her chestnut hair, arranged without artifice, caught none of the candlelight that seemed to favour the golden curls of younger misses. Her figure, of normal weight for the era, had long ceased to be a source of distress and had become instead a simple fact of her existence. What no one in that glittering assembly suspected, however, was that the plain spinster half hidden behind greenery could have purchased the very house in which they danced, along with most of the surrounding square, without troubling her banker overmuch. If stories of women who discover their true worth in the most unexpected moments move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. The revelation of Victoria's carefully guarded secret would begin, as so many life-altering moments do, with careless words spoken by those who believed themselves beyond consequence. Victoria had not intended to linger near the cardroom, that masculine sanctuary where gentlemen retreated to discuss matters deemed unsuitable for delicate feminine ears. She had been seeking the retiring room when the distinctive voice of Nicholas Edward Carlisle, Duke of Bramwell, arrested her movement with the force of a physical blow. The Duke spoke, his tone carrying that particular aristocratic drawl that marked men born to consequence. "The matrimonial market this season is decidedly thin, gentlemen. Miss Arabella Hampton brings barely £5,000, though her father insists on calling it a fortune. Miss Weatherby might manage 8,000 if one includes her mother's jewels, though I suspect half are paste." Laughter echoed from within the cardroom, the cruel mirth of men evaluating women as commodities. Victoria's hand froze on the doorframe, her breath catching in her throat. Another voice inquired, "What of the others?" Victoria recognized Lord Gerald Fitzwilliam, second son of the Earl of Westbridge, a man whose gambling debts were whispered about in drawing rooms throughout Mayfair. "Others?" The Duke's voice carried amusement tinged with contempt. "Do you refer to those unfortunate creatures lurking about the edges of ballrooms, hoping against hope for some gentleman's attention? Lady Margaret Ashworth is pleasant enough, I suppose, though her father's debts are legendary. As for Miss Sinclair, the woman behind those palms there, good heavens, she must be nearing 30. Plain as a pikestaff, of normal and unassuming physique. And what could she possibly bring besides tedious respectability and perhaps £2,000 if one is being generous?" The words struck Victoria with the precision of carefully aimed arrows. 20 years of composure, of dignity maintained through countless slights, of grace under the weight of society's dismissal, crumbled in an instant. Something fierce and rebellious that she had suppressed since childhood ignited in her chest, burning away years of careful restraint. She stepped from behind the palms, her grey silk gown rustling in the sudden silence that fell over the corridor. Several gentlemen who had been lingering nearby turned to stare, sensing drama about to unfold. Victoria said, her voice carrying with unexpected strength through the suddenly hushed space, "Your Grace, how fascinating that you presume to know the financial circumstances of ladies to whom you have never been properly introduced." Nicholas Edward Carlisle emerged from the cardroom, his tall frame filling the doorway. His eyes, the colour of winter storms, widened fractionally as he took in her presence. He was handsome in that austere aristocratic manner, dark hair swept back from a high forehead, features that spoke of generations of careful breeding. His evening attire was impeccable, though Victoria's educated eye noted the slight wear at his cuffs, the waistcoat that was last season's style. "Miss Sinclair," he said, recovering his composure with the speed of long practice, I did not realize you were positioned so close. I apologize if my words caused you distress. The apology was perfunctory, delivered with the same care one might use in stepping around an inconvenient puddle. It was not, Victoria understood with sudden clarity, remotely sincere. Years of suppressed anger, of enduring dismissal and contempt from people who knew nothing of her true worth, crystallized into a moment of perfect rebellion. Her cousin Lydia would call it social ruin. Her late grandfather would have called it magnificent. Victoria said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Since you are so interested in monetary values, Your Grace, perhaps you would like to know that your estimation is off by a factor that would strain even your ducal arithmetic. The corridor was filling now, drawn by the scent of scandal. Lady Finchley appeared from the ballroom, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with obvious interest. Lord Fitzwilliam stood frozen in the card-room doorway, his expression caught between horror and fascination. Nicholas regarded her with an expression that mingled confusion and condescension. Miss Sinclair, I am certain your circumstances are quite respectable. I meant no genuine offence. Then allow me to educate you, Your Grace, Victoria replied, and felt the power of truth settling over her like armor. I own half of London. The statement fell into silence so profound that the distant strains of the string quartet seemed suddenly loud. A dozen faces stared at her, expressions ranging from disbelief to shock. Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. From the docks at Rotherhithe to the finest squares in Mayfair, my fortune in property generates more in monthly rents than your estates have seen in years. But please do continue explaining how my £2,000 and plain face make me unworthy of consideration. The Duke's face drained of colour, his aristocratic composure cracking visibly. Lady Finchley's fan snapped open with a sound like a pistol shot, her eyes wide with astonishment. Victoria executed a curtsy of perfect correctness, her years of deportment lessons serving her well in this moment of triumph. I bid you good evening, Your Grace, my lords, my ladies. I find I have lost my appetite for society's particular brand of entertainment. She turned and swept through the corridor, her head high, her hands trembling only slightly. Behind her, the silence erupted into furious whispers, but Victoria did not look back. She had spent 28 years invisible. Tonight she had ensured that no one would ever overlook her again. The consequences would be immediate and severe. But as her carriage rolled through snow-dusted streets toward her grandfather's house on Russell Square, Victoria found she did not care. Truth, she discovered, was its own form of liberation. The morning after Lady Finchley's Christmas ball dawned cold and bright, winter sunlight reflecting off snow-covered streets with painful intensity. Victoria woke in her chamber at the Russell Square house to find her cousin Lydia already installed in the morning room, her expression a mixture of horror and reluctant admiration. Lydia announced without preamble, setting down her teacup with enough force to rattle the saucer, "The entire city is speaking of nothing else. Lady Finchley sent round a note at 8 o'clock this morning." 8 o'clock, Victoria. The woman must have written it before breaking her fast. Victoria poured herself tea from the silver service, her hands steady despite a night of little sleep. "And what does Lady Finchley have to say?" "She wishes to know if the claim is true," Lydia said, producing a cream-coloured note from her reticule. "Half the ton is calling it the ravings of a spinster, driven mad by rejection. The other half is frantically calculating property values in Mayfair." "It is true," Victoria said simply, settling into the chair opposite her cousin. "Every word." Lydia stared at her for a long moment, then released a breath that seemed to contain years of accumulated tension. "Your grandfather's fortune, Samuel Harrington's holdings in the funds. I knew there was money, Victoria, but I had no idea of the scale." "Grandfather believed that genteel poverty was no virtue," Victoria replied. "He spent 40 years acquiring property when aristocrats were forced to sell during crises on the exchange. He taught me to manage every aspect of the estate before he died." Understanding dawned in Lydia's eyes. "You visit the properties yourself. Those mornings you claim to be visiting charities in the East End." "I am conducting business," Victoria confirmed. "Meeting with solicitors, inspecting buildings, ensuring tenants are treated fairly. The property in Rotherhithe alone brings in nearly £12,000 annually." Lydia set down her teacup and regarded Victoria with new eyes. "Who sat in ballrooms for 3 seasons, knowing you could buy and sell half the people there? Would it have changed their treatment of me?" Victoria asked quietly. "Money cannot purchase beauty, Lydia. It cannot make me younger or transform my figure into something fashionable. It cannot erase the fact that my grandfather was a merchant, that trade flows through my veins as surely as blood." "No," Lydia admitted, "but it might have saved you from last night's humiliation." Victoria set down her own cup, her voice gaining strength. "Was it humiliation? I spent 3 seasons enduring whispers and pitying glances, Lydia. I watched men like the Duke of Bramwell look through me as though I were transparent. Last night, I made certain he will never overlook me again." Before Lydia could respond, their butler Hendricks appeared in the doorway, his usual imperturbable expression slightly troubled. "Miss Sinclair, there are 17 cards waiting in the hall. 17 calls before noon, miss, and more arriving by the moment." Victoria and Lydia exchanged glances. The full weight of Victoria's revelation was beginning to manifest in the most tangible way possible, which was social attention. "Place them on the silver tray in my study," Victoria instructed. "I shall review them after breakfast." As Hendricks departed, Lydia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What are you going to do?" "This attention will not all be kindly meant, Victoria. There will be fortune hunters, social climbers, people who dismissed you yesterday who will now pretend they always saw your worth." "I am going to continue, as I always have," Victoria replied calmly. "Managing my properties, living my life, and refusing to apologize for speaking truth to power." What Victoria did not say, what she barely acknowledged even to herself, was that Nicholas Edward Carlyle's words had cut deeper than mere insult. They had exposed something she had long suspected. In the Duke's eyes, and in the eyes of men like him, she was worth exactly what her purse contained and nothing more. The knowledge burned with the cold fire of absolute clarity. The afternoon brought an unexpected development. Victoria was in her study, reviewing tenant agreements for a property near Covent Garden, the smell of old ink and parchment filling the air, when Hendricks announced a visitor whose name made her pen pause mid-stroke. "Mr. Edmund Davenport of Davenport and Sons Solicitors," Hendricks intoned. "He requests a moment of your time on a matter of some delicacy." Victoria knew Davenport and Sons. They represented some of the oldest families in England, including the ducal house of Bramwell. She set down her pen with deliberate care. "Show him to the drawing room," she instructed. "I shall join him presently." Mr. Edmund Davenport was a man of perhaps 50 years. His silver hair and shrewd eyes, speaking of decades, spent navigating the complexities of aristocratic business. He rose as Victoria entered, executing a bow of precise respect. "Miss Sinclair, thank you for receiving me without notice. I come on behalf of a client who wishes to express his most sincere regret for words spoken in haste and ignorance." Victoria settled into a chair upholstered in sapphire velvet, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Your client being the Duke of Bramwell, I presume?" "Indeed," Davenport confirmed, remaining standing until Victoria gestured for him to sit. "His Grace has asked me to convey his deepest apologies for the unconscionable manner in which he spoke of you last evening. He understands that no words can adequately address the offense given, but wishes you to know that he is profoundly ashamed of his conduct." "How convenient that his shame manifested only after learning of my fortune," Victoria observed, her tone pleasant, despite the steel beneath. "One might almost suspect the apology is motivated by financial interest rather than genuine remorse." Davenport had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I cannot speak to His Grace's private feelings, Miss Sinclair. I can only convey his message and inform you that he would consider it a great honor if you would consent to receive him, that he might apologize in person." Victoria studied the solicitor for a long moment, considering. Every instinct urged her to refuse, to maintain her dignity through distance. Yet curiosity tugged at her, that dangerous desire to understand what had prompted this attention. Was it merely mercenary interest, or had her words struck some deeper chord? "You may inform His Grace," she said finally, "that I am at home to callers between 3 and 5 o'clock. If he wishes to apologize, he may do so during appropriate calling hours, in the presence of my cousin as chaperone." Davenport's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Miss Sinclair. His Grace will be most grateful for your generosity." After the solicitor departed, Victoria remained in the drawing room, staring into the fire that crackled in the marble hearth. Snow had begun falling again outside the tall windows, coating London in a blanket of white that softened its harsh edges. She thought of Nicholas Edward Carlyle as she had last seen him, his face drained of colour, his aristocratic composure shattered by her revelation. Part of her took fierce satisfaction in having punctured his arrogance. Another part, one she barely acknowledged, wondered what sort of man lay beneath the ducal pride. The Duke of Bramwell arrived precisely at 3 o'clock the following afternoon, his appearance so punctual that Victoria suspected he had been waiting in his carriage to ensure perfect timing. Hendricks announced him with his usual impassive dignity, though Victoria detected a glimmer of interest in the butler's eyes. Nicholas entered the drawing room with the natural authority of a man accustomed to commanding any space he occupied. He was dressed impeccably in a dark blue coat that emphasized his broad shoulders, his cravat tied in an intricate knot that spoke of either a talented valet or considerable personal skill. He executed a bow of such depth that Victoria understood it as a gesture of sincere respect. "Miss Sinclair," he said, his voice carrying none of the contempt that had colored it 2 nights previous. "Thank you for receiving me. I am deeply sensible of the honor you do me." Lydia sat near the window with her embroidery, a chaperone whose presence was proper but whose attention was undoubtedly focused on every word exchanged in the center of the room. "Your Grace," Victoria replied, gesturing to a chair opposite her own. "I understand you wish to speak with me." He waited until she was seated before taking his own chair, another gesture of respect that did not escape her notice. For a moment, he seemed to struggle for words, and Victoria found herself unexpectedly curious about what the proud Duke of Bramwell might say when stripped of his aristocratic armor. He began, his grey eyes meeting hers directly. "I have spent the past 2 days considering how to adequately express my regret for the inexcusable manner in which I spoke of you. I have concluded that there are no words sufficient to the task. My comments were cruel, unjust, and spoke to a character flaw I had not previously recognized in myself." Victoria remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I have made inquiries," he admitted, "which I acknowledge is presumptuous, but I needed to understand the full scope of my ignorance. Your grandfather Samuel Harrington was a man of remarkable vision and business acumen. The holdings he built, which you now manage, represent decades of shrewd investment and careful stewardship. The fact that you personally oversee these estates, that you visit tenants and maintain the properties with such care, speaks to a character that deserves profound respect." "And yet," Victoria said quietly, 2 nights ago, you valued me at £2,000 and dismissed me as plain and unremarkable." The words hung between them, sharp as winter frost. Nicholas did not flinch from them, but she saw the cost of hearing them reflected in his expression. "I did," he said simply. "I spoke from ignorance and prejudice, evaluating you as one might evaluate goods at market. It was contemptible, Miss Sinclair, and I can only throw myself upon your mercy and hope that you might in time find it possible to forgive such unconscionable behavior." Victoria studied him for a long moment, searching for signs of calculation or false sentiment. What she found instead was something unexpected, which was genuine shame, and beneath it a glimpse of the man who had learned to wear aristocratic pride as armor against the world. "Your estates are in difficulty," she said, not unkindly. "Your father's gambling debts have left you in circumstances that require you to consider marriage as a financial solution rather than a matter of affection." His jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. "My father was a man of great charm and little sense. He died 2 years ago, leaving behind debts that have consumed most of my income. I have spent the past 24 months attempting to restore the family holdings to solvency, but the task is considerable." "And so you came to London seeking a bride with fortune enough to solve your problems," Victoria continued, her tone remaining neutral. "That is practical, Your Grace, if somewhat mercenary. What was unconscionable was your assumption that any woman without significant wealth was beneath your consideration, worthy only of contempt. You are correct, he acknowledged, his voice rough. I had become so focused on the necessity of the situation that I forgot to see the people involved as anything beyond their financial value. Your words 2 nights ago were a mirror held up to my own worst qualities, Miss Sinclair, and I did not like what I saw reflected there. Victoria felt something shift in her perception of him, a slight softening of the anger that had burned so brightly since the ball. He was flawed, certainly, and his pride had led him to cruelty, but there was honesty in his acknowledgement, a willingness to confront his own failures that spoke to deeper character. I accept your apology, Your Grace, she said finally. I appreciate your candor regarding your circumstances, and I acknowledge that financial pressure can lead even good men to make poor choices. Relief crossed his features, followed by something that looked remarkably like curiosity. May I ask you a question, Miss Sinclair? One that has troubled me considerably since that evening. You may ask, Victoria replied. I reserve the right not to answer. Why did you remain silent for 3 seasons, he asked, leaning forward slightly in his chair. You possessed the means to command any attention you wished, to live far beyond the modest manner in which you presented yourself. Why endure the dismissal and contempt when you could have silenced it all with a word? It was, Victoria realized, an intelligent question, one that cut to the heart of her choices. She glanced toward Lydia, who had paused in her embroidery to listen, then looked back at the Duke. Because wealth cannot purchase genuine regard, she said simply. Had I announced my fortune, every unmarried man in London would have paid court. But they would have been courting my property holdings, not Victoria Sinclair. I wished to know if anyone could see value in me beyond what I might bring to a marriage settlement. And did anyone? Nicholas asked quietly. No, Victoria admitted, allowing him to see the pain beneath her composure. 3 seasons, Your Grace, and not a single gentleman looked at me and saw a woman worth knowing. They saw only what you saw. A plain spinster approaching 30, hardly worth the courtesy of an introduction. Money might have gained me a husband, but it would not have gained me respect or affection. The words settled between them, heavy with truth. Nicholas sat back in his chair, his expression troubled. I was a fool, he said finally. Worse than a fool because I allowed financial pressure to blind me to common decency and human worth. You deserved far better treatment than I gave you, Miss Sinclair, than London society has given you. I hope that my recognition of that fact, however belated, might represent the beginning of amended behavior. Victoria found herself unexpectedly moved by his words. She had expected perfunctory apology, the sort of social courtesy that costs nothing and means less. What she received instead was something approaching genuine contrition. I appreciate your honesty, Your Grace, she said, her voice softening slightly. It cannot have been easy to acknowledge such things, particularly to a woman you had dismissed so thoroughly. It was considerably easier than living with the knowledge of what I had done, he replied. I have spent 2 days understanding that I had become exactly the sort of man I most despise, one who measures human worth in pounds and pence. They spoke for another quarter-hour, the conversation gradually shifting from apology to more general topics. Victoria found herself discussing property management, and Nicholas proved surprisingly knowledgeable about agricultural improvements and tenant relations. His own estates, he explained, had suffered from years of neglect, but he was working to implement reforms that would benefit both the land and the people who worked it. When he finally took his leave, executing another deep bow before departing, Victoria remained seated in the drawing room, her thoughts troubled. The Duke of Bramwell was not the shallow aristocrat she had expected. Beneath the pride and financial pressure lay a man of intelligence and perhaps genuine principle. The discovery was both surprising and deeply unsettling. He is in love with you, Lydia announced from her position by the window, setting down her embroidery. Don't be absurd, Victoria replied, though her heart had begun to beat faster at the words. He is motivated by practical necessity. I represent a solution to his financial difficulties. Perhaps, Lydia conceded, but I watched his face when you spoke of enduring 3 seasons of dismissal. That was not the expression of a man calculating property values, Victoria. That was the expression of a man who recognized he had injured someone he had come to care about. Victoria turned away, unwilling to let her cousin see the hope that had begun, against all wisdom, to take root in her heart. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. She had learned that lesson thoroughly over 3 seasons of watching other women waltz while she stood behind potted palms. The days following Nicholas's visit brought a flurry of social attention that Victoria found both exhausting and revealing. Lady Finchley called, ostensibly to apologize for her Christmas ball becoming the scene of such drama, but clearly fishing for details about Victoria's property holdings. Lord Fitzwilliam appeared with roses and an invitation to drive in Hyde Park, his previous indifference replaced by obvious interest in her fortune. Even Miss Arabella Hampton, who had never deigned to speak to Victoria before, suddenly discovered they had much in common. Victoria received them all with perfect courtesy and gave them nothing. She recognized fortune hunting when she saw it, having watched such behavior directed at heiresses for 3 seasons. The difference was that she no longer felt invisible. She felt instead like prey. The one person whose continued attention surprised her was Nicholas himself. He called 3 times in the week following their first conversation, always during proper hours, always respectful of propriety. He brought no gifts beyond flowers appropriate to a calling acquaintance. He made no declarations or inappropriate advances. He simply talked with her about property management and agriculture, about books they had both read, about the complexities of navigating London society. It was, Victoria discovered, more seductive than any romantic overture might have been. Their 4th meeting occurred not in her drawing room, but in Hyde Park, where Victoria had gone to walk along the Serpentine on a morning crisp with frost. She was accompanied by Lydia, her hands tucked into a fur muff against the December cold, when she encountered Nicholas driving his curricle along Rotten Row. He drew his matched bays to a halt beside their path, executing a slight bow from his elevated position. "Miss Sinclair, Mistress Pemberton, what a pleasant surprise. I had not expected to encounter anyone else mad enough to brave the cold this morning." "The exercise is beneficial," Victoria replied, shading her eyes against winter sunlight reflecting off snow. "And the park is beautiful in this weather." "Indeed it is," Nicholas agreed, though his eyes remained on Victoria's face rather than the surrounding scenery. "Might I offer you ladies a ride? The curricle is small, but I believe we could manage." Lydia glanced at Victoria, a question in her eyes. Victoria hesitated only a moment before nodding. Nicholas assisted them, and Victoria found herself being handed up into the curricle with Nicholas's strong grip steadying her. The curricle was indeed small, requiring them to sit close enough that Victoria could feel the warmth of his body against her side. He set the horses to a gentle walk, navigating the frost-covered paths with easy skill. "I have been thinking about your grandfather," Nicholas said after they had driven in comfortable silence for several minutes. "Samuel Harrington must have been a remarkable man to build such a fortune from nothing." "He was," Victoria confirmed, her voice warming with affection. "He came to London at 16 with £5 and determination enough to move mountains. He worked first as a clerk, then bought his first property at 22, with money he had saved by living on almost nothing. He saw opportunities where others saw only poverty and risk." "He taught you everything," Nicholas observed, guiding the horses around a turn. "Property management, finance, negotiation, that is unusual for a woman." "He had no sons," Victoria explained. "Only one daughter, my mother, who married my father against grandfather's wishes. When both my parents died of fever when I was 8 years old, grandfather took me in. He said he would not raise a helpless female, dependent on the kindness of male relatives who might squander her inheritance. He trained me as he would have trained a son." "And your title, Miss Sinclair?" Nicholas asked. "Your father was gentry?" "Minor gentry," Victoria confirmed. "My father was the younger son of a younger son, with no fortune and no prospects beyond what he could earn as a solicitor. Grandfather despised him for what he called pretensions to a status unsupported by means. They reconciled only after my parents' deaths, and then only for my sake." Nicholas was quiet for a moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "So you exist between 2 worlds, too gentle by birth to be accepted fully by merchants, too tainted by trade to be accepted fully by aristocracy. Precisely, Victoria said, surprised by his insight. I have spent my entire life being neither one thing nor the other, Your Grace. It is a lonely position. Nicholas, he said suddenly, turning to look at her directly. I wish you would call me Nicholas, at least when we are in company small enough to permit it. Your Grace sounds so formal, so distant. Victoria met his gaze, seeing genuine appeal in his grey eyes. It was a small intimacy he requested, the use of his Christian name, but one that implied friendship at the very least. Then you must call me Victoria, she replied, her voice soft. Though I warn you, Lydia will be scandalized. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually austere features into something approaching warmth. I suspect your cousin is made of sterner stuff than you credit, Victoria. The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected thrill through her. Victoria turned her attention to the winter landscape, unwilling to let him see how much that simple familiarity affected her. They drove for another quarter-hour, conversation flowing easily between them. Nicholas spoke of his estates in Northumberland, of his plans for agricultural improvements, and his hope to establish a school for tenant children. Victoria told him of her own properties, of her efforts to ensure fair rents and proper maintenance, of her dream to build housing for workers that would be both affordable and dignified. It was only as they approached the Sinclair townhouse on Russell Square that Victoria realized how much she had revealed, how thoroughly she had let down her guard with this man who had so cruelly dismissed her barely a week before. The realization troubled her, a small voice of caution warning against trust too easily given. As if sensing her thoughts, Nicholas drew the horses to a halt before her door and turned to face her directly. I know you have little reason to trust me, Victoria. I know that my words at Lady Finchley's ball created a wound that 1 week of courtesy cannot fully heal, but I hope you will give me the opportunity to prove that I am more than the worst moment you witnessed. Why? Victoria asked, her directness surprising herself. Why does it matter to you what I think? You have apologized. Your social obligation is discharged. Nicholas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because I find myself genuinely desiring your good opinion. Not because of your fortune, though I would be lying if I said financial considerations had not initially prompted my attention, but because you possess one of the finest minds I have encountered, male or female. And because your dignity in the face of dismissal speaks to a character I find myself wishing to know better. It was not a declaration of love. It was not even a declaration of romantic interest. But it was honest, and Victoria found herself valuing honesty above the pretty speeches that would have been easy for a man of his position to produce. Then continue to call, she said quietly. Continue to drive with me in the park, to discuss property management and agricultural reforms. Let us see what develops from honest conversation, Nicholas, rather than assumption and prejudice. His smile, when it came, was brilliant enough to rival the winter sun. He handed her down from the curricle with careful attention, his touch lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. As Victoria entered her townhouse, Lydia following behind with an expression of barely suppressed excitement, she found herself thinking that perhaps hope was not always foolish, perhaps sometimes it was justified. The week before Christmas brought an unexpected invitation. Lady Genevieve Hartwell, a widow of considerable fortune and social influence, was hosting a small dinner party at her residence in Bedford Square. Victoria received the invitation with some surprise, as she had never moved in Lady Hartwell's elevated circle. The note accompanying the invitation made the reason clear. My dear Miss Sinclair, it read in elegant script, I have long admired your grandfather's business acumen and your own management of his legacy. I would consider it an honor if you would join my small gathering on the 22nd of December. I have invited several gentlemen engaged in commerce and property, and I believe you would find the conversation stimulating. His Grace the Duke of Bramwell will also be in attendance. Victoria showed the invitation to Lydia, who immediately began planning her wardrobe. Lady Hartwell moves in the highest circles, Lydia explained, her excitement palpable. She is accepted everywhere despite her merchant origins because she married an earl's younger brother and has become a patroness of the arts. This is a significant honor, Victoria. The evening of the dinner party arrived cold and clear, stars visible in the winter sky as Victoria's carriage navigated through London streets. She had chosen a gown of deep crimson silk that complemented her colouring while maintaining the modest neckline appropriate to her status as an unmarried woman. Lydia had dressed her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual simple arrangement, allowing curls to frame her face in a manner that softened her features. Lady Hartwell's residence in Bedford Square was elegant without being ostentatious, its drawing rooms warm with candlelight and the scent of hothouse flowers. Victoria was announced and entered to find perhaps 20 guests already assembled, their conversation creating a pleasant hum of sound. Nicholas stood near the fireplace, engaged in discussion with two gentlemen Victoria did not recognize. He looked up as she entered, his expression brightening in a manner that sent warmth through her chest. He excused himself from his companions and crossed the room to greet her. "Victoria," he said, offering a bow, "you look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Nicholas," she replied, allowing him to take her hand. "I confess, I am somewhat nervous. I do not know most of these people." "Then allow me to introduce you," he offered, his voice warm. "Lady Hartwell has assembled an interesting group. The gentleman near the window is Lord Quinton Hertford, who has invested heavily in canal development. The lady in green is Mistress Beatrice Cunningham, who runs a charitable foundation for orphaned children. That gentleman examining Lady Hartwell's collection of Chinese porcelain is Mr. Malcolm Fairfax, who owns textile mills in Manchester." As Nicholas guided her through the room, making introductions, Victoria gradually relaxed. These were not the dismissive aristocrats of the ballrooms she had endured. These were people engaged in commerce and improvement, individuals who valued practical accomplishment over empty breeding. Dinner was announced, and Victoria found herself seated between Nicholas and Lord Hertford, with Lady Hartwell presiding at the head of the table. The conversation quickly turned to matters of business and social improvement. "The high war tariffs on grain are strangling commerce," Lord Hertford declared, his voice passionate. "Artificial restrictions on imports benefit only the largest landowners while driving up prices for everyone else. The effect on property values in industrial cities has been catastrophic." "The effect on the poor has been worse," Mistress Cunningham interjected, her voice sharp with conviction. "Children are starving while wealthy aristocrats protect their monopoly on grain production. It is unconscionable." Victoria hesitated for a brief second, feeling the weight of the room's attention, before allowing her years of experience to speak. "The properties I own in Suffolk have seen tenant income decline by nearly 20% in the past 2 years," she explained. "Workers cannot afford both rent and food. I have been forced to reduce rents to prevent mass evictions, which has naturally affected my own income, but the alternative was to see families cast into the street." "You own property in Suffolk?" Mr. Fairfax asked with interest. "Industrial or residential?" "Both," Victoria confirmed. "My grandfather believed in diversifying holdings. I own 3 spinning mills, several warehouses near the river, and approximately 200 cottages providing housing for workers." The table fell silent for a moment, various guests reassessing their understanding of the quiet woman in the crimson gown. Nicholas, she noticed, was watching her with an expression of fascination. 200 cottages, Lord Hertford repeated. "That is a substantial holding. How do you manage tenant relations on such a scale?" "I employ 3 property managers who report to me weekly," Victoria explained, warming to a subject she understood deeply. "We maintain strict policies regarding repairs and habitability. Rent increases are tied to a formula based on average wages in the area rather than arbitrary decisions. Tenants who fall on hard times through illness or injury are given grace periods rather than immediate eviction. It is both good business and the right thing to do." "Good business?" Lady Hartwell inquired, leaning forward with interest. "How so?" "Tenant loyalty," Victoria replied simply. "When people are treated fairly, they maintain the properties, pay rent reliably when they can, and stay for years rather than moving constantly. My turnover rate is less than 5% annually, compared to industry averages of 20% or higher. The money saved in repairs and lost rent more than compensates for the slightly lower rents I charge." The dinner continued in this vein, conversations ranging from canal investments to educational reform to the moral obligations of property owners toward their tenants. Victoria found herself holding court in a manner that would have been unthinkable in the aristocratic drawing rooms she had endured for 3 seasons. Nicholas contributed thoughtfully to the discussions, revealing a mind engaged with practical improvements rather than merely theoretical philosophy. He spoke of his efforts to implement crop rotation on his Northumberland estates, of installing drainage systems that had increased yields by 30%, of his plans to build a school that would teach both academic subjects and practical skills. "You understand something that many of your class refuse to acknowledge," Lord Hertford said to Nicholas during a lull in conversation. "Improving the conditions of your tenants and workers improves your own circumstances. Prosperity cannot exist in isolation." "I'm learning that lesson more thoroughly with each passing day," Nicholas replied, glancing at Victoria. "I have been fortunate in my teachers." After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room, while the gentlemen remained at table for port and cigars. Victoria found herself engaged in conversation with Lady Hartwell, who proved to be as shrewd as her reputation suggested. "You have made quite an impression this evening, my dear," Lady Hartwell observed, settling onto a sofa and gesturing for Victoria to join her. "Lord Hertford was telling me he would like to discuss a potential partnership regarding canal investments. Mr. Fairfax is interested in your tenant management policies for implementation in Manchester. You have accomplished more for your social standing tonight than 3 seasons of ballrooms could achieve." "I simply spoke honestly about my work," Victoria replied, accepting a cup of tea from a servant. "I have discovered that honesty is far less exhausting than pretending to be someone I am not." "And the Duke of Bramwell?" Lady Hartwell asked, her eyes sharp with interest. "There is something between you two. I watched him throughout dinner. He looked at you the way a starving man looks at bread." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "His Grace and I have developed a friendship based on mutual interests, nothing more." "My dear child," Lady Hartwell said gently, "I have been navigating London society for 30 years. I know the difference between courtesy and genuine feeling. That young man is half in love with you already, whether he has acknowledged it to himself or not." The words sent Victoria's heart racing, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Even if that were true, which I doubt, what difference would it make? His Grace requires a wife with fortune to restore his estates. My fortune comes from trade, from property management and tenant relations. His family would never accept such a connection." "His family," Lady Hartwell said, her voice taking on a steely quality, "consists of a mother who has been living beyond her means for 20 years and a younger sister who married a wealthy baron 2 years ago. Neither has any ground on which to object to an alliance that would save the ducal estates from ruin. As for Nicholas himself, he strikes me as a man intelligent enough to recognize value when he encounters it." Before Victoria could respond, the gentleman rejoined the ladies, Nicholas immediately seeking out Victoria's company. He settled beside her on the sofa, his proximity sending warmth through her, despite the proper distance he maintained. "You were magnificent at dinner," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Watching you discuss property management and tenant relations with such authority and passion was extraordinary. You belong in rooms like this, Victoria, engaged with people who value your mind and accomplishments. Rather than standing behind potted palms at balls," Victoria said, allowing a touch of humor into her voice. "Rather than being dismissed by fools who could not see your worth," Nicholas corrected, his voice fervent. "I count myself among those fools, Victoria, but I hope I am learning." They talked for another hour as the party continued around them, their conversation ranging from serious topics to shared humor. Victoria found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in years, her usual guardedness melting away in the warmth of Nicholas's attention. It was only as her carriage rolled through darkened streets toward Russell Square that Victoria allowed herself to examine the evening fully. Lady Hartwell's words echoed in her mind, "Half in love with you already." Could it be true? And if it was, what did it mean? Nicholas needed her fortune, yes, but tonight she had seen something deeper, a meeting of minds that transcended financial necessity. Hope That dangerous emotion bloomed more fully in her chest. Victoria pressed her hand against her heart, feeling its rapid beating, and wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, she might dare to believe in possibility. The week leading up to Christmas brought a series of events that would test both Victoria's newfound confidence and the developing connection between herself and Nicholas. The first blow came from an unexpected quarter, which was her cousin Richard, son of Lord Finchley. Victoria had never cared for Richard. He was a man of perhaps 35 years, possessed of his father's title-hunting ambitions, but lacking his father's charm. He had ignored Victoria completely during her 3 seasons in London, and she had been grateful for the neglect. His arrival at the Russell Square house 3 days before Christmas, therefore, came as an unwelcome surprise. "Cousin Victoria," he said, sweeping into her drawing room with an assumption of welcome that immediately set her teeth on edge. "How delightful to finally have opportunity for proper conversation. I have been hearing the most extraordinary things about our family's circumstances." Victoria remained seated, offering the minimum courtesy required by their distant kinship. "Richard, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Why, to discuss family matters, of course," he replied, settling into a chair without invitation. "This fortune you have been concealing from the family, Samuel Harrington's properties. Surely you realize such significant holdings should be managed by someone with proper experience in these matters." "They are being managed by someone with proper experience," Victoria replied coolly. "Myself. I have been overseeing the estate for 6 years, and it has grown by 18% in that time." Richard waved a dismissive hand. Yes, I am certain you have done adequately for a woman, but now that your circumstances are public knowledge, it is time for a man to take charge. As your nearest male relative on your mother's side, I am prepared to assume responsibility for managing your properties." Victoria stared at him, momentarily speechless at his presumption. "Richard, I am 28 years old, of sound mind, and under no legal obligation to surrender management of my own property to anyone. I thank you for your concern, but it is entirely unnecessary." His expression hardened, revealing the calculation beneath his pleasant facade. "Come now, Victoria. You cannot seriously intend to continue managing such extensive holdings yourself. What will your future husband think? What gentleman of quality would accept a wife who involves herself in trade and tenant relations?" "Then I suppose I shall have to find a gentleman of quality who values intelligence and capability," Victoria replied, her voice taking on an edge. "As I have no intention of surrendering control of my property to anyone, husband or otherwise, it will necessarily limit my options. I am comfortable with that limitation." Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more threatening tone. "You should consider your position carefully, cousin. Your grandfather's merchant origins are well known. Questions could be raised about the source of his initial capital, rumors of smuggling connections at the docks, of goods acquired through less than legal means. Such scandals can destroy reputations, Victoria, and property values along with them." The threat was unmistakable. Victoria felt cold settle over her, the warmth of the past weeks evaporating in an instant. "My grandfather's business was entirely legitimate. Any suggestion otherwise is both false and actionable." "Truth matters less than perception in our world," Richard said, rising to his feet. "I urge you to reconsider my offer, Victoria. Family should help family, after all. And family can also protect family from unpleasant gossip, provided family shows appropriate gratitude." He departed with a bow that mocked courtesy, leaving Victoria alone with the bitter taste of his threats. She sat in silence for several minutes, her mind racing through possibilities and responses. Richard meant what he said. He would spread lies about her grandfather's business dealings, would paint Samuel Harrington as a criminal, rather than the honest merchant he had been. The damage to her reputation, already precarious due to her merchant origins, could be catastrophic. Worse, such rumors could affect her properties. Tenants might refuse to pay rent to someone accused of criminal connections. Business partners might sever relationships. The carefully built edifice of respect she had begun to construct could crumble in days. Victoria penned a quick note to her solicitor, Mr. James Winchester, requesting an urgent meeting. Then she sat at her desk, pulled out her property ledgers, and began systematically documenting every aspect of her grandfather's business dealings. If Richard intended to wage war through rumor, she would defend with facts. The meeting with Mr. Winchester took place the following morning in his offices on Chancery Lane. The solicitor, a man of 60 years with a reputation for both discretion and effectiveness, listened carefully as Victoria explained Richard's threats. "He is attempting extortion," Winchester said flatly when she finished, "demanding control of your property under threat of spreading damaging rumors. It is illegal, though proving it would be difficult without witnesses to his exact words." "Can he actually damage my reputation with false rumors?" Victoria asked, dreading the answer she already suspected. Winchester hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Unfortunately, yes. The Ton operates on gossip and perception rather than evidence. If Lord Finchley's son begins spreading stories about your grandfather's supposed criminal connections, others will repeat them without verification. The fact that the stories are lies matters little if people choose to believe them. So he can destroy everything my grandfather built simply by lying," Victoria said, feeling despair settle over her. "Not destroy," Winchester corrected gently. "Damage, certainly, but not destroy. Your properties are real, your income is documented, your business practices are exemplary. The truth would eventually prevail. However, the process would be painful, expensive, and socially damaging." Victoria returned to Russell Square feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. She had dared to hope, had begun to believe that perhaps she could find acceptance and even happiness. Now that hope seemed as fragile as winter ice. The second blow fell 2 days later, on Christmas Eve morning. Victoria was reviewing accounts in her study when Hendricks announced a visitor whose arrival sent shock through her system. "Mr. Edmund Davenport of Davenport & Sons," the butler intoned, his expression suggesting the news he brought was not pleasant. Davenport entered looking grave, his usual professional composure shadowed by distress. "Miss Sinclair, I come on an urgent matter that requires immediate attention and considerable financial resources." Victoria gestured him to a chair, her hands suddenly cold despite the fire burning in the hearth. "What has happened?" "Your properties in Southwark," Davenport said, pulling documents from his case. "5 of your largest tenants, including the manufactories, have broken their leases simultaneously. They cite newly discovered structural concerns that make the buildings unsuitable for continued occupation. Each is demanding return of advance rent payments and compensation for loss of trade." Victoria's mind raced through the implications. Those buildings were inspected thoroughly 6 months ago. There were no structural concerns. This is coordinated action. "I agree," Davenport confirmed. "However, the leases contain provisions allowing early termination if structural safety becomes questionable. Unless you can conclusively prove the buildings are sound, which would require expensive surveys by reputable master builders, you are legally obligated to return their advance payments and compensate them according to the lease terms." "How much?" Victoria asked, though she already suspected the answer would be devastating. £48,000, Davenport said quietly. "Due within the week, or the tenants will file suit. Given the timing Christmas Eve, I suspect this was planned to catch you without time to arrange financing through normal channels." Victoria sat back in her chair, the numbers cascading through her mind. She had £48,000 available, but withdrawing that much would leave her dangerously short of ready funds. She would be unable to cover upkeep costs for her other properties, unable to make necessary repairs, unable to weather any additional financial shocks. It would not destroy her, but it would severely weaken her position. "This is Richard's work," she said, certainty settling over her. "He threatened me 3 days ago. This is his response to my refusal to surrender control of my properties." Davenport nodded grimly. "I suspected as much. Lord Finchley's son has connections throughout the city. It would not be difficult for him to pressure your tenants, perhaps offering them alternative locations or financial incentives to break their leases simultaneously." Victoria stood and walked to the window, staring out at snow-covered streets. Christmas Eve should be a time of joy and celebration. Instead, she faced financial crisis orchestrated by a vindictive relative who sought to control her through destruction. "I can pay," she said finally, turning back to Davenport. "I will liquidate holdings, call in loans, whatever is necessary, but it will leave me vulnerable to further attacks." "There is another option," Davenport said hesitantly. "A loan at standard commercial rates. I could arrange financing through several sources within 24 hours. The terms would be favorable given your creditworthiness." "And the source of such financing?" Victoria asked, suspecting the answer. "Several possibilities," Davenport replied, "including His Grace the Duke of Bramwell, who has authorized me to offer any financial assistance you might require." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Nicholas had money available, she knew. His estates were recovering, and he had mentioned funds that had proved profitable. He could loan her £48,000 without significant hardship. But accepting such a loan would place her in his debt, would create exactly the sort of financial entanglement that complicated relationships. More than that, it would mean admitting that she needed rescuing, that despite her wealth and independence, she could still be brought low by the machinations of cruel men. "Tell His Grace," Victoria said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart, "that I appreciate his generous offer, but must decline. I will handle this matter through my own resources." Davenport looked as though he wished to argue, but something in Victoria's expression stopped him. He gathered his papers, assured her he would handle the legal arrangements for the payments, and departed. Victoria spent the remainder of Christmas Eve in her study, writing letters to her bankers, arranging the liquidation of government securities, calculating and recalculating her remaining liquid assets. By evening, she had ensured that the £48,000 would be available, though the cost to her financial security was significant. As church bells rang out midnight, marking the beginning of Christmas Day, Victoria sat alone in her study and allowed herself one moment of despair. She had been so close to happiness, to genuine connection with a man who seemed to value her for herself rather than merely her fortune. Now financial crisis threatened everything, and worse, Richard's promised rumors would soon spread, destroying the fragile acceptance she had begun to build in Lady Hartwell's circle. The knock on her study door came as a surprise. Victoria looked up to find Lydia entering, her expression concerned. "You have been here for 12 hours, Lydia said gently. "It is Christmas morning, Victoria. Come away from these papers." "I cannot," Victoria replied, her voice rough with exhaustion. "There is too much to manage, too many arrangements to make." Lydia crossed the room and took Victoria's hand, pulling her to her feet. "The arrangements are made. The money will be paid. For tonight, for this one Christmas morning, allow yourself to rest." Victoria allowed herself to be led to her chamber, to be helped from her gown and into her nightclothes. But sleep did not come. She lay awake in darkness, listening to snow tap against windows, and wondered how dreams could crumble so quickly into dust. Christmas morning brought an unexpected visitor. Victoria was in the morning room, attempting to choke down breakfast she did not want, when Hendricks announced Nicholas. His arrival was highly improper for such an early hour on Christmas Day, which suggested the matter was urgent. He entered like winter storm, his hair disordered, his greatcoat still damp with snow, his expression fierce with emotion barely contained. "You refused my help," he said without preamble, crossing the room to stand before her. "Davenport came to me last night, told me you declined the loan." "Victoria, why?" "Because I will not be in debt to anyone," she replied, setting down her teacup with careful precision. "Not even you, Nicholas. Especially not you." "Especially not me," he repeated, his voice rising. "What does that mean? Do you trust me so little? Do you believe I would use a loan to manipulate or control you?" "I believe," Victoria said, rising to face him, "that financial entanglements complicate relationships. I believe that owing you £48,000 would fundamentally alter the dynamic between us. I believe that I have fought too hard for independence to surrender it now, even to someone I care about." The words hung between them, her admission that she cared more honest than she had intended. Nicholas stared at her, his chest rising and falling with emotion. "You care about me," he said, his voice dropping to something softer, more vulnerable. "Yet you would rather face financial devastation than accept help from me. I would rather face temporary setback than permanent obligation, Victoria corrected. I have managed, Nicholas. The money is being paid. My properties remain mine, controlled by me. That independence is worth the cost. He reached out, taking her hands in his touch warm despite the winter cold he had brought with him. Victoria, you stubborn, magnificent fool. I was not offering a loan as a business transaction. I was offering help because watching you struggle when I have means to assist is agony. I was offering partnership, support, the kind of mutual aid that should exist between people who care for each other. Partnership, Victoria repeated, her voice breaking slightly. Is that what we have, Nicholas, or is this still about my fortune being the solution to your financial difficulties? He released her hands as though burned, stepping back with an expression of such hurt that Victoria immediately regretted the words. But they had needed saying, the question that had haunted her since his apology. Is that what you truly believe? He asked, his voice rough. That my attention has been motivated solely by your money? That every conversation, every drive in the park, every moment we have shared has been calculated financial strategy? I don't know what to believe, Victoria admitted, sinking back into her chair. I want to believe you see me as a person, Nicholas, not a solution. But I am a woman with a fortune, and you are a man who needs one. Those facts cannot be ignored. Nicholas was silent for a long moment, his expression cycling through pain, anger, and finally something that looked like resignation. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, Victoria. I see a woman of remarkable intelligence who manages a property empire with skill that humbles me. I see someone who treats her tenants with compassion while maintaining profitable business. I see a person who endured 3 seasons of dismissal and contempt without losing her dignity or her essential kindness. I see someone who speaks truth to power, who values integrity over social acceptance, who would rather face financial hardship than compromise her independence. He moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could see the emotion in his grey eyes. Yes, I need your fortune, he continued. I would be lying if I denied it. But I need your intelligence more, your strength, your refusal to accept anyone's estimation of your worth except your own. I need the way you challenge me to be better, to see beyond aristocratic pride to human value. I need you, Victoria, not your property holdings. Tears had begun sliding down Victoria's cheeks, though she made no sound. Nicholas knelt before her chair, taking her hands again, his grip gentle but firm. I know I have given you little reason to trust my motives, he said. I know that my initial approach was mercenary, motivated by financial desperation rather than genuine regard. But somewhere in the past weeks, Victoria, between discussions of tenant relations and agricultural reform, between drives in the park and dinners at Lady Hartwell's, I fell in love with you. The words struck Victoria's heart like physical blow. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of calculation or false sentiment, finding only raw honesty and vulnerability. You love me, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. I love you, he confirmed. I love your brilliant mind and your compassionate heart. I love the way you transform when discussing property management, the way your entire being comes alive with passion for your work. I love your courage in speaking truth, your refusal to be diminished by others' opinions. So I love you, Victoria, with every fiber of my being, and the fact that you are wealthy is merely a fortunate circumstance rather than the primary motivation. Victoria pulled one hand free, pressing it against his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin and the slight roughness of morning stubble. I want to believe you, she whispered. I want so desperately to believe that someone could see past my plain face and unassuming appearance to the person beneath. There is nothing plain about you, Nicholas said fiercely. You are beautiful in ways that transcend conventional appearance. You are radiant when you speak of your work, magnificent when you defend your principles, extraordinary in every way that matters. He rose, pulling her to her feet, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. Let me help you, Victoria. Not as debtor and creditor, but as partners facing adversity together. Let me stand beside you as you navigate Richard's threats. Let me love you not for your fortune, but despite it, because the woman you are transcends any monetary value. Victoria searched his eyes for another long moment, then made her decision. She rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring into that kiss all the hope and fear and desperate longing she had suppressed for so long. Nicholas responded with a passion that stole her breath, his arms coming around her, holding her as though she were precious beyond measure. The kiss deepened, months of restraint dissolving into mutual recognition and desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nicholas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, the words simple, but weighted with everything he felt. "Not for money or social advantage or anything beyond the fact that I love you and cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Yes," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling with joy and terror. "Yes, Nicholas, I will marry you." He kissed her again, tender and reverent, then pulled back to look at her seriously. "We need to address Richard's threats and the financial attack. Together, Victoria. No more handling everything alone." She nodded, allowing herself for the first time in her life to lean on someone else's strength. "Together," she agreed. They spent the remainder of Christmas morning planning their strategy. Nicholas proved to be as practical as he was passionate, his aristocratic connections providing avenues Victoria's merchant origins had closed. He would make inquiries about Richard's business dealings, looking for leverage. Lady Hartwell would be enlisted to counter any rumors Richard spread. The properties in Southwark would be inspected by independent architects Nicholas knew personally, men whose reputations were beyond question. "There is one other matter we must address," Nicholas said as midday approached. "My mother." Victoria's happiness dimmed slightly. She had not yet met the Dowager Duchess of Bramwell, but reputation suggested a woman of rigid social standards and aristocratic pride. "She will object to our marriage," Victoria said quietly. "I am exactly what she would least desire for her son, merchant origins, plain appearance, approaching 30. "She will object initially," Nicholas confirmed. "My mother has specific ideas about appropriate duchesses, none of which include property management or tenant relations. But she is also practical enough to recognize that our estates require immediate financial infusion, and that you are the only woman I have ever seriously considered marrying." "How reassuring," Victoria said dryly. "She will accept me because I can save the family finances." "She will accept you," Nicholas corrected, "because I will give her no choice. Because you are remarkable and she will eventually recognize that fact. And because if she does not accept you, she will lose her son." The words were said with such finality that Victoria understood he meant them absolutely. Nicholas would choose her over his mother's approval, over social acceptance, over everything. The knowledge settled something in her heart that had been unsettled since childhood. The confrontation with the Dowager Duchess came sooner than expected. She arrived at Russell Square that very afternoon, her carriage pulling up with the authority of one accustomed to command. Victoria received her in the formal drawing room, Lydia positioned nearby as chaperone and witness. The Dowager Duchess swept in like an ice storm given human form. She was perhaps 60 years old, tall and imposing despite her years, her silver hair dressed in an elaborate style that belonged to an earlier era. Her gown was expensive but slightly dated, her jewels magnificent but fewer than one might expect of a duchess. Victoria recognized in an instant the signs of genteel poverty maintained through rigid pride. "So," the Dowager said without preamble, her voice as cold as her expression, "you are the merchant's granddaughter who has ensnared my son." "I am Victoria Sinclair," Victoria replied, rising to execute a curtsy of precise correctness. "And I have ensnared no one, Your Grace. Your son has honored me with a proposal of marriage, which I have accepted." "A proposal motivated by the £48,000 he so generously offered to loan you," the Dowager said, her tone making it clear she considered Victoria's acceptance of financial help to be evidence of calculation. "A loan I declined," Victoria corrected calmly. "I am handling my financial difficulties through my own resources, as I have handled all aspects of my business for the past 6 years. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "Business. You manage property, I am told. Visit tenants personally, negotiate leases, involve yourself in trade. You do realize that a Duchess of Bramwell cannot continue such activities. Then I suppose," Victoria said, her voice remaining steady despite the anger building in her chest, "that your son will have to reconsider his choice, because I have no intention of surrendering management of my properties, not for a title, not for social acceptance, not for anything." They stared at each other across the elegant drawing room, two women from different worlds, neither willing to yield. Into this tense silence came Nicholas himself, still wearing his greatcoat, clearly having followed his mother directly from his own residence. "Mother," he said, his voice carrying warning, "I trust you are showing Miss Sinclair the courtesy she deserves as my future wife." "I am showing her the reality she will face," the dowager replied, turning her cold gaze on her son. "This woman may have money, Nicholas, but she will never have breeding. Society will never fully accept a tradesman's granddaughter as Duchess of Bramwell. You will face whispers, subtle ostracism, the very real possibility of social diminishment." "Then we shall face it together," Nicholas said, moving to stand beside Victoria. "And I count social diminishment a small price for a marriage based on genuine love and mutual respect." "Love," the dowager repeated, the word dripping with contempt. "How romantic." "And when love fades, Nicholas, when you wake 10 years hence and realize you have tied yourself to someone who can never truly be your equal, what then?" "She is my equal," Nicholas said quietly. "In every way that matters, she exceeds me. Her intelligence, her compassion, her strength of character, all surpass anything I might bring to the marriage. I am fortunate beyond measure that she has agreed to have me." Victoria reached for his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes at his unwavering support. The dowager watched this gesture with an expression impossible to read. "You would choose her over your family," the dowager said, not quite a question. "I would choose her over everything," Nicholas confirmed. "She is my family now, Mother. You may accept that and remain part of our lives, or you may refuse and find yourself increasingly isolated. The choice is yours." The dowager stood frozen for a long moment, generations of aristocratic pride warring with practical necessity and perhaps some deeper recognition. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its ice. "Very well," she said. "If you are determined to make this match, Nicholas, I will not stand in your way, but do not expect me to celebrate it." "I expect nothing beyond basic civility," Nicholas replied, "which I trust you can manage, given your legendary social graces." The dowager turned to Victoria, her expression still cold but no longer actively hostile. "You may have money, Miss Sinclair, but can you truly become a duchess? Can you navigate the complexities of aristocratic society, manage a ducal household, fulfill all the obligations that title requires?" "I have managed a property empire worth more than most ducal estates," Victoria replied evenly. "I believe I can handle the complexities of your social world, particularly as I have no intention of conforming to all its more ridiculous expectations." Something that might have been respect flickered in the dowager's eyes. "You have spirit," she acknowledged. "That may serve you well, though it will also create difficulties. Very well. If this marriage is to occur, it must be done properly. St. George's, Hanover Square, Archbishop presiding, full ceremony. If society is to witness your elevation, let us ensure they cannot question its legitimacy." With that pronouncement, she swept from the room, leaving Victoria and Nicholas staring at each other in something approaching disbelief. "That went better than expected," Nicholas said finally. "Your mother essentially called me unworthy while agreeing to the marriage," Victoria replied. "How is that better than expected?" "She did not threaten to disinherit me," Nicholas pointed out, "and she committed to a proper wedding. For my mother, that represents significant compromise." Victoria laughed despite herself, the sound slightly hysterical. "We are engaged. Your mother despises me. I am facing financial sabotage, and yet somehow I am happier than I have been in years." Nicholas pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We will face everything together, Victoria. Richard's threats, my mother's disapproval, whatever society throws at us. Together." She buried her face in his chest, breathing in his scent, feeling his strength and warmth surrounding her. For the first time in her life, Victoria was not alone. The knowledge was both terrifying and magnificent. The weeks following their engagement brought battles on multiple fronts. Richard made good on his threat, spreading rumors about Samuel Harrington's supposedly criminal business dealings. The story spread through society with the speed of wildfire: smuggling at the docks, dealings with known criminals, property acquired through blackmail and extortion. Lady Hartwell proved invaluable in countering these rumors. She hosted another dinner party, this time specifically to allow Victoria to present documented evidence of her grandfather's legitimate business practices. Mr. Winchester provided affidavits from bankers, testimony from merchants, proof of proper licensing and taxation. Lord Hertford, who had investigated Samuel Harrington's reputation before proposing his canal partnership, spoke eloquently about the merchant's integrity. "I knew Samuel Harrington personally," Lord Hertford declared to the assembled company. "He was a man of absolute honesty, someone who could have cut corners and increased his profits, but chose instead to maintain the highest standards. These accusations against him are not merely false, they are slanderous." The tide of rumor did not stop entirely, but it slowed. Those who valued facts over gossip began defending Victoria publicly. The social acceptance she had begun building at Lady Hartwell's first dinner party solidified into genuine support from a core group of influential people. Nicholas's contribution came from a different angle. Using his aristocratic connections, he began investigating Richard's business dealings, looking for leverage. What he discovered was damning. "Richard has been speculating in property," Nicholas reported during one of their daily meetings to coordinate strategy. "Buying on credit, assuming values would rise, planning to sell at profit before payments came due. The market has turned against him. He is facing ruin within months unless he can raise significant capital quickly." "Which explains why he wanted control of my properties," Victoria said, understanding crystallizing. "He intended to use them as collateral for his own debts." "Precisely," Nicholas confirmed. "When you refused, he attempted to force your hand through coordinated attack on your Southwark holdings. When that failed, he turned to character assassination, hoping to damage your reputation enough that you would accept his help to restore it." "What do we do with this information?" Victoria asked. Nicholas smiled, the expression containing no warmth. "We make him an offer. He withdraws all rumors, apologizes publicly for spreading false information, and signs a legally binding agreement never to approach you about your properties again. In exchange, we do not expose his financial situation to his creditors." The meeting with Richard took place at Mr. Winchester's offices, neutral ground where witnesses could document every word spoken. Richard arrived, looking haggard, his usual confident facade cracking under the strain of his financial difficulties. Winchester laid out the evidence methodically. Documents showing Richard's property speculations, letters from creditors demanding payment, proof that he had pressured Victoria's tenants to break their leases. The case was overwhelming. "You have attempted to destroy Miss Sinclair's reputation through false accusations," Winchester concluded. "You have engaged in what amounts to extortion, demanding control of her properties under threat of social destruction. These actions could result in legal prosecution and certainly in complete social ruin once made public." Richard stared at the documents, his face pale. "What do you want?" "Public retraction and apology," Nicholas said flatly. "You will announce at the next major social gathering that your previous statements about Samuel Harrington were based on incorrect information, that you have since verified his business practices were entirely legitimate, and that you regret any distress your mistakes caused Miss Sinclair. You will sign a legal document renouncing any claim to influence over her properties, and you will never approach her again with demands or threats." "And if I do this?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse. "We remain silent about your financial situation," Victoria said, speaking for the first time. "We allow you time to extricate yourself from your difficulties without the additional pressure of creditors calling loans due immediately. We give you the opportunity to rebuild without destroying you completely." "You would do this for me?" Richard asked, a sneer curling his lip as he sought to regain some ground. "I suppose a woman cannot stomach the thought of truly crushing an opponent. You will bankrupt yourself with sentimentality before the year is out." Victoria regarded him with absolute calm. It is not sentimentality, Richard. It is the understanding that mercy demonstrates power far more effectively than cruelty ever could. Sign the papers." He signed the documents with shaking hands, his defeat absolute. His public apology came at Lady Finchley's 12th night ball, delivered with obvious reluctance, but documented by dozens of witnesses. The rumours did not vanish entirely, but they lost their power, dismissed as the false accusations Richard himself admitted them to be. With that crisis resolved, Victoria and Nicholas turned their attention to preparing for their wedding. The ceremony was scheduled for late January, giving society 6 weeks to adjust to the scandal of a duke marrying a merchant's granddaughter. The Dowager Duchess, true to her word, ensured the wedding would be conducted with full ducal ceremony. St. George's, Hanover Square was booked, the Archbishop secured, invitations sent to everyone of consequence in London. If society was to witness Victoria's elevation, the Dowager seemed determined to eliminate any possibility of questioning its legitimacy. The wedding preparations brought Victoria and Nicholas closer, their partnership deepening as they navigated everything from guest lists to settlement agreements. Nicholas's solicitors worked with Winchester to create marriage contracts that protected Victoria's independent control of her properties, while also ensuring the Bramwell estates received sufficient capital infusion. "I want it documented," Victoria insisted during one particularly complex negotiation, "that my properties remain under my sole management, that the income I generate belongs to me, though I will naturally contribute to household expenses and estate improvements, that I retain the right to continue my business activities without seeking permission." "Some will see such arrangements as unseemly," the Dowager commented, having invited herself to the negotiations. "Wives typically yield all property control to their husbands." "Then those people need not concern themselves with my marriage," Victoria replied calmly. "Nicholas and I are building a partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. That requires protecting both parties' interests and independence." The Dowager regarded her for a long moment, then surprised everyone by nodding. "Very well. I may not approve of your unconventional approach, Miss Sinclair, but I respect your insistence on clear terms. Too many women enter marriage with vague promises and find themselves trapped. At least you are entering with eyes open." It was, Victoria recognized, as close to approval as she was likely to receive from Nicholas's mother. She would take it. The wedding morning dawned cold and bright, the first day of February bringing clear skies and winter sunlight that painted London in shades of gold and silver. Victoria woke early in her chamber at Russell Square, her wedding gown laid out across a chair, her future arriving with terrifying inevitability. Lydia helped her dress, the ivory silk falling in elegant lines that emphasized Victoria's figure without attempting to conceal it. The modiste had created something magnificent, a gown that made no apologies for the woman wearing it. Victoria's hair was dressed simply, allowing her natural beauty to show rather than attempting to transform her into something she was not. "You are beautiful," Lydia said, tears in her eyes. "Victoria, you are absolutely beautiful." Victoria looked at herself in the mirror and, for perhaps the first time in her life, believed the words. She was beautiful, not despite her merchant origins or unassuming physique or approaching 30 years, but because of everything those things represented. She was strong, successful, accomplished. She had built a fortune and maintained it through intelligence and hard work. She had spoken truth to power and won, and she was about to marry a man who saw all of that and loved her for it. The wedding procession to St. George's drew crowds, curious Londoners lining the streets to watch the merchant's granddaughter become a duchess. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism, but many showed something approaching approval. Victoria had become, in the weeks since her confrontation with Nicholas at the Christmas ball, something of a symbol, the woman who refused to be diminished by society's expectations. St. George's, Hanover Square was packed with guests, the church filled with the cream of London society, and many of Victoria's business associates. Lady Hartwell occupied a place of honor near the front, her expression radiating satisfaction. Lord Hertford and Mistress Cunningham sat together, their presence representing the world Victoria came from and would continue to inhabit. Even some of Victoria's tenants had gathered outside the church, waiting to catch a glimpse of the woman who treated them fairly, becoming a duchess. Nicholas waited at the altar in full ceremonial dress, his expression transforming as Victoria appeared at the entrance. She saw love in his eyes, and pride, and something that looked like awe. He watched her walk down the aisle as though she were the most precious thing in the world, and Victoria felt her heart swell with emotion. The Archbishop performed the ceremony with appropriate solemnity, his words carrying through the hushed church. Victoria and Nicholas spoke their vows clearly, each promising to honor and respect the other, to build a life based on partnership and mutual support. When Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands were steady, his voice firm. "With this ring, I thee wed. All that I am I give to you. All that I have, I share with you." Victoria returned the vow, her own voice clear despite tears streaming down her face. "All that I am I give to you, all that I have I share with you." The Archbishop pronounced them married, and Nicholas kissed her with a tenderness that belied the passion she knew lay beneath. The congregation erupted in applause, some enthusiastic, some polite, but all acknowledging the union that had just been sealed. The wedding breakfast at Bramwell House in St. James's was an elaborate affair, the Dowager having spared no expense in demonstrating that the new Duchess of Bramwell would be received with full honours. Victoria moved through the reception, receiving congratulations and carefully concealed skepticism with equal grace. Several interactions stood out. Lady Finchley approached with what appeared to be genuine warmth, apologising for having hosted the ball where Victoria had been so insulted. Lord Fitzwilliam, who had laughed at Nicholas's cruel words, offered stiff congratulations before retreating quickly. Miss Arabella Hampton, whose brief friendship had evaporated when Victoria's fortune was revealed, maintained cold distance. But Lady Hartwell's words, spoken as she embraced Victoria warmly, meant more than all the aristocratic approval in the room. "You have done something remarkable," she said quietly. "You have shown that worth is not determined by birth or conventional beauty, that intelligence and character matter more than breeding. You have given hope to every woman who has been dismissed by society's narrow standards." As evening approached and guests began to depart, Victoria found herself alone with Nicholas in the Bramwell House library, a room lined with books and warmed by a fire crackling in a massive hearth. "Your Grace," Nicholas said, his voice teasing, "how does it feel to be a duchess?" "Strange," Victoria admitted, settling into a chair near the fire. "I am the same person I was this morning, yet now I have a title and responsibilities I never imagined." Nicholas knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You will be magnificent in this role, just as you are magnificent in everything you do. But remember, Victoria, you are still you, still the woman who manages half of London's property, who treats tenants with compassion, who speaks truth without fear. The title does not change that." "Some will expect it to," Victoria said quietly. "They will expect me to abandon my business, to become a conventional duchess focused on social obligations and charitable committees. Then they will be disappointed," Nicholas replied firmly. "We agreed from the beginning that this would be a partnership of equals. You will continue managing your properties, continuing your work. I will support you in that, not attempt to constrain you." Victoria leaned forward, kissing him with all the love and gratitude she felt. "I chose well," she whispered against his lips. "We both did," he replied, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Now come, Your Grace. We have a lifetime to begin." 5 years later, on an April morning in 1820, Victoria stood in the nursery at Bramwell House watching her 3 children play. William, at 4 years old, showed disturbing signs of inheriting his mother's head for business, having already begun organizing his toy soldiers into efficient formations. Eleanor, 2 years old, possessed her father's aristocratic bearing and her mother's stubborn independence. Baby James slept peacefully in his cradle, blissfully unaware of the remarkable family into which he had been born. Nicholas entered the nursery, wrapping his arms around Victoria from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Do you remember what today is?" "The anniversary of my rebellion," Victoria replied, smiling at their private tradition. Every year on the anniversary of the Christmas ball, where she had confronted Nicholas, they celebrated what they called the day truth changed everything. They had built an extraordinary life together in those 5 years. The Bramwell estates had been restored to profitability through Victoria's careful financial planning and Nicholas's agricultural innovations. Her property holdings had expanded, now including housing developments designed specifically for workers, built to standards that prioritized dignity and comfort alongside profit. They had founded 3 schools together, institutions that taught both academic subjects and practical skills, open to children regardless of their family's ability to pay. Victoria's tenant management policies had become models studied by property owners throughout England. Nicholas had been elected to Parliament, where he advocated for reforms to benefit workers and challenged the high grain tariffs that kept prices artificially elevated. The Dowager Duchess had gradually thawed, her initial coldness giving way to grudging respect, and eventually something approaching affection. She would never fully approve of Victoria's unconventional approach to being a duchess, but she acknowledged the results: flourishing estates, happy tenants, a son who had found both financial stability and genuine happiness. Society's acceptance had come more slowly, but it had come. Victoria would never be embraced by the most rigidly traditional elements of the ton, but she had built her own circle: progressive aristocrats, successful merchants, intellectuals and reformers who valued merit over birth. Lady Hartwell's drawing room remained a frequent gathering place, conversations ranging from business to politics to art. "I have been thinking," Nicholas said, his voice quiet against Victoria's ear, "about that night at Lady Finchley's ball, about the man I was then. So focused on financial necessity that I could not see human worth, about how close I came to missing the greatest gift life could offer." "You grew," Victoria replied, turning in his arms to face him. "We both did. I learned to value myself rather than seeking validation from others. You learned to see beyond aristocratic pride to genuine merit. We found each other through adversity and built something stronger for it." Nicholas kissed her forehead, his arms tightening around her. "I love you more now than on our wedding day, Victoria. Every year brings deeper understanding, greater appreciation for the remarkable woman you are. You transformed not just my circumstances, but my entire worldview. You taught me what partnership truly means." Victoria rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the solid warmth of him surrounding her. She thought about the young woman who had stood behind potted palms at ballrooms, convinced she was invisible, believing herself unworthy of notice or love. She thought about the moment she had chosen rebellion over silence, truth over dignity, authenticity over acceptance. "I never imagined this," she said quietly. "Standing in a ducal nursery with our children playing, discussing property management with Parliament members, being valued for my mind rather than dismissed for my appearance. I never dared hope for happiness like this." "You deserved it all along," Nicholas replied. "You always possessed extraordinary worth, Victoria. The tragedy was not that you lacked value, but that so many people refused to see it. I am grateful beyond measure that you gave me the opportunity to prove I could learn to see truly." That evening, after the children were asleep, Victoria and Nicholas hosted a small dinner party. The guest list included Lady Hartwell and Lord Hertford, Mistress Cunningham and Mr. Fairfax, several progressive members of Parliament and their wives. Conversation ranged across topics that would scandalize traditional society: workers' rights, educational reform, the moral obligations of property owners, the need for representation that extended beyond aristocratic interests. Victoria held court as naturally as breathing, discussing profit margins and tenant loyalty programs, debating the relative merits of different housing designs, challenging assumptions about what was possible. Nicholas watched her with obvious pride and love, occasionally contributing but mostly content to observe his wife in her element. As their guests departed, Lady Hartwell paused to embrace Victoria warmly. "You have become exactly what I hoped that first dinner party, a bridge between worlds, someone who proves that intelligence and character matter more than birth. You are changing London, my dear, one conversation and one policy at a time." Alone, finally, Victoria and Nicholas stood together in the library that had become their private sanctuary, the room where they planned their business ventures and social reforms, where they argued policy and discussed their children's futures, where they simply existed together without the weight of titles or expectations. "What would you tell her?" Nicholas asked, pulling Victoria into his arms. The young woman standing behind those palms at Lady Finchley's ball, convinced she was invisible and unworthy. What would you tell her if you could? Victoria considered the question seriously, thinking about everything she had learned in the years since that transformative night. "I would tell her," she said finally, "that her worth is not determined by others' opinions. That value does not diminish with age or deviation from conventional beauty standards. That the greatest courage is speaking your truth, because you never know who might be listening, ready to see you truly for the first time." Nicholas kissed her, tender and reverent, a kiss that spoke of years together and years yet to come. "I am grateful I was listening," he murmured against her lips. "I am grateful for your courage, for your rebellion, for every moment that led us to this life we have built together." Victoria rested her forehead against his, her eyes closing, her heart full of joy and gratitude and love that had grown stronger rather than fading with time. She had stood invisible for 3 seasons, had been dismissed and mocked and overlooked. But she had refused to be diminished. She had spoken truth to power, had claimed her worth, had built a life of meaning and purpose. And in doing so, she had found not just love but partnership, not just acceptance but genuine respect, not just happiness, but the profound satisfaction of living authentically. The merchant's granddaughter had become a duchess, yes, but more importantly, Victoria Sinclair had become fully herself, had discovered her own voice and refused to silence it for anyone. As London settled into winter darkness beyond the library windows, Victoria and Nicholas held each other close, their love a warmth against the cold, their partnership a foundation upon which they had built something extraordinary. They had faced adversity together, had weathered scandal and financial crisis and social opposition. They had emerged stronger, their bond deepened by every challenge overcome. The story that had begun with cruel words at a Christmas ball had transformed into something far greater, a testament to the power of truth, the importance of valuing human worth over superficial judgments, the possibility of redemption and growth, and above all, the transformative nature of love built on genuine respect and equality. Victoria had owned half of London when she married Nicholas. Together they had built an empire not of property alone but of principle, creating change that would echo through generations. And they had done it by remaining true to themselves, by refusing to accept society's limitations, by choosing partnership over power and compassion over convenience. It was, Victoria reflected, as she stood in her husband's arms, a far better ending than the young woman behind the potted palms could ever have imagined. And it was only the beginning. Thank you for journeying with us through this tale of courage and love. If you believe in speaking your truth and stories that celebrate resilience and transformation, please subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories that remind us all of our inherent worth.